this week in the Rose Garden, we're talking about the history of D&D.
Yeah, dog.
Yeah, we're going to talk about, so much today.
Yeah,
we
it
have
is a little bit of
lots to talk about.
This is a audience request, so you're welcome. And we did some research, and by research I mean we did research.
She did research.
We plopped a bunch of interesting things into a document from various sources in which we will name as we kind of go through it.
Yeah.
But we're going to kind of use the structure of the Smithsonian Magazine's article that was titled 14 Fun Facts About Dungeons and Dragons.
It kind of like nicely goes through the chronological history, though. And Caitie pulled some really good articles that also highlight and expand on some of the sections in the Smithsonian. So we'll be sure to link everything so that you guys can go read this stuff too if you're interested.
Mm-hmm.
But this will be like a heavy like reference piece of material.
Yeah.
But yeah, and Granger is contemplating coming to sit with us today.
Pumpkin.
So let's see if he does it.
I'm just really not sure today.
Yeah, he's really unsure. He's kind of been sizing up the couch, like, why are you guys sitting on the couch?
Because it's podcast time.
Because it's podcast time. Cora understands.
Great. So just in general, D&D started back in like the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to decide how like much to just read.
She's like, do I sit here and go, Gary Gygax lost his job at an insurance company in Chicago?
How much
I understand.
But anyway, we're going to start from the beginning. Point number 1, thanks to the Smithsonian Magazine article, 14 Fun Facts About Dungeons and Dragons. Point number 1 is Gygax was a war game fan first.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So he enjoyed playing tabletop war games and strategy games that realistically simulated armed conflicts. And that was his main hobby. He tried to design a war game called Chainmail in 1971.
Yep.
These first like 3 points are really just setting things up. So we're going to kind of blaze through them and the discussion will come here in a second. In the point number 2, thanks to Smithsonian Magazine.
Thank you, Smithsonian.
Thank you so much, Smithsonian. D&D started as an afterthought to Chainmail. So we started with Chainmail. He tried to capture a kind of swashbuckling action in his war game.
I feel like this is really like the inception of, I want some kind of role-playing element so it doesn't just feel like we're playing Risk all the time and all these other strategic war games. So him starting to kind of develop Chainmail was very much because he thought something was missing from those war games he was playing.
The Chainmail had a fantasy supplement that he wrote, and a lot of historical people who liked war games based on the historical references kind of wrote off the magical aspects.
Yeah.
Folly at best, heresy at worst.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
Which that is a quote from Wired's David Kushner in a 2000 profile that he wrote. And so last little setup here for D&D's history, using Gary Gygax's fantasy rules, David Arneson created the first D&D prototype called Blackmore. So Arneson met Gygax at a convention in 1969. He was a war game fan based in Minnesota, and he took Chainmail's fantasy rules, and instead of strategizing their way through military battles, players in his game explored imaginary dungeon of a castle called Blackmore. In 1971, Arneson and a friend made the 5-hour drive to Lake Geneva to play Blackmore with Gygax. Gygax was impressed and asked Arneson to share his rules, and Arneson sent him between 18 and 24 tightly packed pages of rules. Gygax then suggested the two co-write a new game, building on both of their ideas.
So when I was reading this, I was very much trying to take myself out of the like mental context that I exist in now.
Sure.
Like if I was to make a 5-hour drive to go see a friend, I probably would have been able to DM them a bunch on Instagram, probably have their phone number and like text them a bunch about it, email them about it. But at this point we've got letters, we've got phone calls.
Right.
And maybe other ways of communication that I don't know of.
I think that's about it.
Yeah. And so my thought is like, dang, like barely met these people like at a convention or something. And we're like, yeah, let's be friends, which I think is just, I mean, it's great networking, a little bit of sad foreshadowing. It's not a great relationship, but like the start of it, that's really, really cool that just those by chance like meetings like that eventually became what we now know as D&D.
Yeah, this is from a Nerdist article, the story of D&D Part 1, the birth, death, and resurrection of Dungeons and Dragons. David Arneson, when he read the chainmail fantasy rules, adapted them to a fantasy world of his own, a setting inspired by Lord of the Rings universe, combined with elements of Arneson's own imagination and various mechanics pulled from other games. The premise was simple. Players would portray only a single character, an idea he lifted from a game called Braunstein.
Yeah, because, and this is something that I like, I don't play any like war strategy games, but in a lot of those, you are commanding an entire army. Right, you are a whole unit of people instead of an individual.
Right.
So that's really like narrowing down the scope of what they were playing before when it comes to developing D&D.
And then you would explore dungeons, shockingly enough.
Plain and simple.
Where they would face perils and puzzles. Both the characters in the stories would persist from session to session, with characters working cooperatively and improving over time. So again, from a war game perspective, you would play a battle. Right. And then you'd go away, and then the next time you wanted to play with your friends, you'd play a different battle. You know, like it wasn't an overarching story necessarily.
Right.
So that's just kind of an interesting tidbit about Blackmore and the way Arneson kind of took Gygax's chainmail rules and molded them into truly what we like stereotypically understand Dungeons and Dragons to be.
Right. Like all the nerds in the basement.
Right. Exactly.
Pretending to be the knights and stuff that we imagine to be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Number 4 is Gygax's children were among the game's first test audience.
This like they give the tiniest bit of information about this. I'm sure there are more articles out there that we could find, but I was reading this and just picturing like what that was like kids come home, dad's like, hey,
come here,
it's board game night and I made something. And they're just like, okay.
Yeah. This quotes Riggs, which I forget, I didn't always put down every
person's name
item of reference in here.
I see.
But there's just a quote in here that says, you'll hear a lot of different versions of this was the first game of Dungeons and Dragons ever. But according to Gary Gygax's son, Ernie, the initial run through took place after school on a weekday. It was 2 boys and 1 girl exploring a scorpion nest and fighting a band of reptilian humanoids known as kobolds.
I thought I was just like, that's just wild.
It's very cute. Hi, Michael. Dad has never come up with his own board game necessarily, but this does feel like something that could have happened to me. Like,
Caitie, listen up. We are playing a game this evening.
It would have been after dinner.
Sure.
And it would have been, Dad would have been like, I know what we should do. And Barbara and I both would have been like, okay. And he's like, everybody sit down. And he would not have explained what was happening until we were sitting, like he would explain it as we went kind of a thing. That way you couldn't get overwhelmed by the rules before we even started. That sounds very familiar to me. So I'm sure that was exciting.
I feel like if my dad set this up, I'm trying to think of how my dad like taught us things growing up. He would sit me and my brother down. I don't think that like he would have explained much. He would have given us like the basis of rules. And then I definitely think my dad's focus would be parts of like the role playing if that existed.
Sure.
He'd be like, and now you get to pretend that you're a lizard. Like he would say shit like that.
Yeah. The first publishing run of D&D was assembled actually in Gary Gygax's basement. So this is when I was writing this down and going through all of these articles initially, I was like, the typical American entrepreneurial startup.
In my basement.
I mean? You know, like everybody's crazy pipe dream always starts in your garage or your basement. So when the manuscript of the game rules was finished, Gygax began shopping it around to gaming companies, but no one was interested. Because it was imaginative role play over material accessories, there wasn't a real opportunity to make money off of it. People would buy the one set of rules and then they would never buy it again.
Right.
So many companies didn't see D&D as a profitable venture. Unable to find a publisher for D&D, Gygax partnered with Don Kay to form a gaming company called Tactical Studies Rules in October 1973. And the duo soon brought on an investor named Brian Bloom as an equal partner. TSR published an initial run of 1,000 copies of D&D, putting the game's components together by hand in Gygax's basement. The game went on sale via mail in January 1974.
Which makes total sense, because 74.
Right.
But I just thought that was wild. I was like, especially, I don't know, with lots of either entrepreneurs these days or just thinking about how to get attention for like your Kickstarter. I don't know a single entrepreneur that doesn't like utilize social media or email marketing or like, and I'm sure, so I was like, what did getting the word out about this game look like back then? Was it like letters being sent? Was it like ads being bought in the newspaper? Like they couldn't have had a giant budget.
I think there was a bigger emphasis. Hi, I do marketing as a full-time job.
Yeah, there you go.
I think marketing back then was very, I mean, they had magazines. Magazines were a bigger thing back then.
100%.
And also back then, you didn't just toss everything you got in the mail away if it wasn't a bill.
That's a very good point.
So like nowadays, mail is not something we overlook in marketing. Like that's still something that's very much viable. But it costs a lot to print everything. It costs a lot to mail everything. And unless your piece of mail really stands out on first impression, people are just going to toss it immediately without even reading it.
Yeah.
As long, if it says, honestly, like Sam and I, if it says pre-standard or pre-sorted standard on the like stamp, where stamp go, we just immediately throw it away because that tells me that it's made, like it's
advertising
marketing.
of some sort. Yeah.
So we don't even read half the stuff that comes in the mail unless it has a legitimate stamp or has like our name on it or says like important documents enclosed.
When I don't really like actively buy magazines really anymore. The ones that I do have been for like, honestly, for crafting things. Like I'll be in Joann's and I'm like, oh, they publish this magazine that puts out, you know, so many like patterns of such and such a craft I'm working on every month. So like I'll buy those every once in a while. The way I get magazines is like, I just bought a bunch of yarn online and then they send like their catalog like with my order. But that's, I don't really get stuff like that anymore. No. And so that totally makes sense. But then that again makes me think of like, what was that budget like?
Sure. Yeah.
How does that get pushed out, especially when it's like two people? And I'm thinking about the fact that like we run this podcast and like it's a lot of work. So I'm thinking about like 1971 and I just like there's
it's
a big loop.
So much. I mean, even when we think about doing this podcast, there's so much sacrifice that has to go into starting up something, whether you want to monetize it or not. So like you know, we do this podcast purely for hobby,
for funsies.
And if we can someday make money off of it, like, cool. But that's not necessarily, we're not trying to create a D&D creative empire by any means. But I mean, Gygax and unless they wanted to sell this.
Yeah.
Like, their whole point was to make money off of it, and maybe people not like so finance bro, like, I want to make money to make money. Like, I think part of it was like, I think this is really cool and I think other people would like it.
Yeah, I think a little bit of that spirit is necessary to be able to share. But something you've made with people. I would have to imagine that those partners, what
were their names? Don Kay, Brian Bloom, and Gary Gygax. Like, they had to probably put in a significant amount of personal capital, like financially, to
make it happen.
Print all the products.
Yep.
Mail all the products, and then whatever marketing they did have in magazines or going to conventions and peddling their project that way, things like that. I mean, they had to have a lot of significant individual sacrifice to get this kind of thing off the ground. D&D sold 150 copies in the first month. By summer, TSR, that's that tactical studies, is that what it was?
Tactical studies rules, which I think...
Tactical studies rules. What a wild
just
name.
One little comment about
if we could
that.
Make a note, yeah.
Why couldn't it be tactical study rules? Like, why do you got to put a double S?
Tactical
studies rules. Do you, how funky that feels in my mouth? I'm
sure that if you play war games, that probably made more sense. But as somebody who doesn't, I'm like, what does that even mean?
And like, so I'm upset.
So okay, TSR ordered another 1,000 copies that summer. For the first years of its existence, the game was difficult to find. Because of that, and we were talking about marketing and how much money they had to put in.
Yeah.
Because of that, pirate photocopies of the rules proliferated. The game also cost $10, which was considered to be an exorbitant amount of money at the time for a game.
I'm gonna check really quick. I wanna like convert that.
Oh, sure.
To today.
Sure.
But feel free to continue.
No, that's a great spot to just kind of take a second and think about that. So $10, people were, I mean, we talk about bootlegging and stuff like that, right? People were taking it and pirating D&D because $10 was simply too much money.
1970 what? 74?
Yeah, let me double check. 1973, 74.
Yeah. $10 in 1974 is equal to $64.24 in 2023. Christ. So like
yeah, I'd say so, yeah.
So like, yeah, that's a pretty penny.
Which also
for just a set of rules.
You're telling me, okay, sorry.
No, do it. You're telling me what?
Just inflation.
Oh yeah.
Buck-ass wild. Okay. So yeah, 1974, people were paying $10 for truly a book. Right?
A book of rules. Of rules. Essentially you're buying a textbook.
Right. So because it cost $10, Nerdist is saying that may have had something to do with the intellectual property theft that they were doing.
Oh, sure thing. And that cracks me up, but it's like photocopies proliferated, right? And I'm just like, I want to bet there were like totally people on college campuses who were like, hey kid, you want to play Dungeons and Dragons? I got a stolen photocopy for you, and like whips open a trench coat. You just got like stapled books of D&D rules.
The third printing was published in 1975 and sold out in just a few months. So you started to see this like exponential growth in Dungeons and Dragons. People were really into it. Point number 6, Gygax and Arneson's relationship was not good.
Dun, dun. Just so unfortunate.
Right. Per the Minnesota Historical Society, Arneson really wasn't involved in TSR at all. Gygax viewed him as a quote-unquote designer, not a businessman.
This pisses me off to no end.
Arneson briefly served as TSR's creative director, but was pushed out of the company in 1976. say what you feel about that.
I just said, dude, that's awful, because that's literally what I wrote. For like this to end this way, because so frequently, hello, I'm Soren. I'm a designer. I make all of our graphic content and our illustrations. Caitie does not treat me this way, but like designers frequently get treated like the butt of the joke, or like the less important. And like we're seeing that with AI art right now, like designers being less and less like cared about. So it just makes me sad, because he contributed a ton, I mean, to D&D.
The rules of D&D were Arneson's.
Yeah.
Gygax just took it.
Yeah.
Truly. I mean, according to this retelling.
Right. So like, feel free to comment below. Like, let us know your thoughts, or if you know more than we do. Sure. There are so many people who know more than we do. Yeah. But like, please tell us all about it.
According to this retelling, though, the Blackmoor was the thing that D&D stemmed from.
Right.
So if you follow the trail back, Gygax made Chainmail. Chainmail had a fantasy supplement.
Right.
Arneson took the fantasy supplement and expanded it greatly to create the dungeons, the single character, all of that kind of thing, and then brought it back to Gygax and said, here, look what I did.
666,
and
tight.
Gygax said, this is really cool. I'm going to play it with my kids. My kids liked it. All right, cool. I'm going to try to get other people to buy it.
Right.
And it sounds like Arneson was involved in that to an extent.
Yes.
But I mean, you notice that he wasn't listed when we were talking about tactical studies rules.
Yep.
Don Kay was Gygax's partner, and they brought on Brian Bloom as an investor and an equal partner. But Arneson at that time was the creative director.
Yeah.
And
they don't specify. I just from the way this is written and the way we've been like talking about it, I'm gonna guess that like he wasn't an equal partner,
right?
And that he was just creative director.
So, and then he was pushed out. If D&D went on sale via mail order in January 1974, he was pushed out in 1976. So it was just a couple years later that they were like,
it's just nuts.
See you later. The following year, so 1977. TSR debuted a new version of the game titled Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, citing differences in gameplay. Gygax refused to offer Arneson royalties for the second edition. Cut out of the financial windfall, Arneson took TSR to court in 1979.
Yeah, that's just crazy.
Relations were so bitter that a company newsletter celebrating the construction of a new office building joked about burying Arneson alive beneath the foundation so he could achieve his wish of becoming a part of TSR's operation.
I think that's just so petty and like mean girl shit. Like, what?
For different reasons, I have been talking this week about how it shocks me sometimes who gets to be in charge of businesses and be successful.
Yes, and like, yes.
And that is just an example of that, of just like, oh, okay. Like,
so you just got enough people to agree to not like one person with you and then shoved them out and then acted like they're the bad guy when they're the one that like significantly contributed to your game.
And again, this article doesn't talk at length about Arneson.
About their relationship.
So like, I have no idea what Arneson was like, but just based off of how this article frames it, I just picture this guy being like, can I just come in? And then somebody be like, no. And be like, but I like made it. And then being like, it's mine now. And like, so I don't know if maybe Arneson was also kind of an ass, but like,
I kind of wish that this would talk about it a little bit. But I mean, they don't talk about like Gary Gygax like being an asshole. They just talk about how they pushed out Arneson. So some further research for us is looking up like how these two men were like received by people, like what their relationships were like with their like employees too.
Right. Gygax became the face of D&D, which I mean,
wild.
While Arneson failed to receive the same level of recognition, he really had to watch D&D from the sidelines. After the lawsuit, Arneson continued designing games, but none of them achieved the success that D&D did.
Oh, that's really so sad.
Arneson died at age 61 in 2009, 1 year after Gygax died at age 69.
Which is crazy.
Which also young.
Yeah.
May I say.
Yeah. And is it later in the article? Maybe. It might be later. It's just, I'm interested to know because I think one of the other articles you had found talks about like Gygax's like lifestyle, like once D&D like catapulted him to millionaire status.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I didn't look it up yet, but I'd be interested to know like what his cause of death might have been, and if it was a result of like lifestyle, living in Hollywood, you know, separating from his wife and just going and living like a movie star life.
Right.
If that's part of it, or if it was literally just something that can't be controlled.
Right. Yeah, I can't remember. Now that you say that, I can't remember where that came from. Because I know what you're talking about, and I don't remember where in our stuff it lands. So we might get to that today. We might also, spoilers, we might not. But that is point number 6. So we're going to take a tiny itty bitty break from history. Let your brain soak that in. To recap, Dungeons and Dragons was made from 2 guys. Kind of one though, huh? So Gygax created Chainmail with a fantasy supplement. Arneson took the fantasy supplement and said, "That's cool. I'm gonna make it so that we only play one character and we do it in a castle, and we fight through dungeons. And there's like a consecutive story from session to session." Mm-hmm. He brought that back to Gygax and said, "What do you think about this?" And Gygax said, "That's so lit. I'm gonna play this with my kids." And then his kids went, "Dad, whoa. On God, that's the best thing I've ever seen."
They said, "No cap?
No cap." I love that. And so Gygax said, cool. It's
mine now.
This is mine. Don
Get
K, Brian Bloom, you guys get in here. Let's print
Open
this.
your wallets.
Let's sell it. And Arneson said, "Can I also play?" And he said, "For a little bit, but you have to stay over there."
But no.
And then after a little while, they sold a lot, and D&D was really popular, so popular that people were pirating it. And then they sold more, and then they said, "Hey, Arneson, get out." And Arneson said, "What?" And they said, "Yeah, this is ours now. Bye." And then Arneson said, "I'm going to sue you." And they said, "Okay, bet." And then they put out a newsletter about how he should be buried under the new building.
That's just, and that is extreme. Like,
yes.
like
we escalated
a company-wide newsletter. Like, we're going to bury him just so he can be a part of us. And it's like,
yeah. So now that we've gotten through that, let's all take a second. Like really just take that nasty nerdy white boy energy, let it leave our bodies, and roll with it. Do you have your dice today, or should I roll on D&D Beyond?
I don't have my dice today.
That's great.
Let's roll on D&D Beyond.
I love that for us. Oh no, this one is, I don't know if I deleted it somehow.
Is it broken?
It just says, "Would you rather have a shopping session or a..."
Fill in the blank? Should we bring TJ in?
Reroll.
Okay.
We can fix that later.
Let's see. TJ made those tables so long ago. We should bring him in and be like, "Hi, what were you going to write here?"
Okay, we got it. Would you rather play a total underwater campaign or a complete outer space campaign like Spelljammer? I have my answer unequivocally.
You can go first.
Outer space.
Okay, why?
Space is cool. Because then I can be like a Jedi. That was my lightsaber.
Oh,
noise.
Okay. I was like, where are we going with that?
You know what I mean?
I'm gonna say underwater. Because fish are cool, and because the depths are cool, and because the lost city of Atlantis.
Okay,
yep.
Sure, yeah.
So underwater for me.
This is for our editor TJ. Hi, come here. If you DM an outer space campaign, I'll play a fighter just so I can be a Jedi.
And I will play a mermaid that has to be in space. A space.
In a space tank.
Yes. But I'm going to be like a companion.
What?
Maybe that's not the word I'm looking for. I'm a mermaid, but I live in like a glass bubble, okay. Right? Yeah. But like someone has to pull me around like a balloon.
Oh.
Because they can't walk. Unless we can figure out how to make that work. I'm just popping this off the dome, okay?
She's got like a little like rocket pack water tank that just hovers the entire time.
Okay, never mind. I want to do that.
That would...
I want like a jetpack.
Are you like a magician? What are your powers? And do they permeate through your tank?
I don't know.
How do you hit people?
This is coming off the dome. I'm really excited about her though. She's gonna... Oh yeah. That's gonna be complicated.
You're right.
Either way, I'm gonna be like a fish person in space. We'll figure it out.
What would you do? Space or water?
Space or water?
Okay.
Anyway,
now we're back at the history of D&D.
Should I make a little chromatic roses animation?
Okay, so welcome back to the history of D&D. This is points 7
through 12.
Initially, Gygax and TSR enjoyed huge financial success.
This is the spot we were looking for?
Mm-hmm.
Go on.
Oh, great. The operation went from game assembly on top of plywood and sawhorse tables to offices with hundreds of employees. TSR expanded out of Lake Geneva to the United Kingdom and the East Coast of the United States. D&D made Gygax into a millionaire. Million gajillionaire. He started raising horses on the side.
I love it's in quotes. It's like, started raising horses on the side.
Horse girl, Gary Gygax. By the early 1980s...
You're all right, girl.
He separated from his wife and moved out west. At the zenith of his success, Ed Power for the Telegraph. Oh, Ed Power for the Telegraph in 2017 wrote...
What a name.
Yeah, right. This devout Jehovah's Witness lived a life of boozy, womanizing excess in a mansion in Hollywood. Don't give nerds too much money. It'll go right to their heads.
Actually, I think there's some weird... I think this is like a bigger conversation that we can have, because you can go into so many tangents with this, but I feel like there is a certain persona or like trajectory that we see play out sometimes with people who are often considered nerdy when they get too much power and money, and they just like, they go for it like all the other celebrities, but like too far, too fast.
I don't know breaks. What I'm picturing a piece of media, and I don't know what piece of media this is. It must be something I consumed a long time ago, because I cannot place a single piece of it. But if you know what I'm talking about, feel free to tell us in the comments. But I picture this nerd. Okay. I'm not saying this is Gary Gygax, but maybe it was. Overweight.
Sure.
Kind of scuzzy looking.
Maybe like not conventionally attractive.
Doesn't take care of himself.
Sure.
Couldn't get women.
Sure.
Period.
Sure.
Became a millionaire.
Suddenly. Women.
That's what this feels like to me.
I don't know exactly, like, I think that could describe several pieces of media, but I think that is a trope that absolutely like transpires, and I'm also just at a loss for like which ones. I think there are a bunch of extremes of that trope as well, because you've got incels who like take it out on society, and then you've got people who don't understand how to mitigate themselves and how to like put the brakes on when necessary, and then just go into like excess when they have the power to have all those things. Right. So yeah, just wild to me.
Well, and I also like the devout Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah, I love the way he contrasted that statement.
So Gygax flew off the deep end.
It's your toe.
Not my toe. This one that I'm about to get into is a big one. And we're going to touch on it briefly. It very could and should probably be like more in depth, and we have the ability to go further in depth, but we simply don't want this to be 3 hours long. So we're going to touch on it briefly and know that we're going to come back to it probably in another episode later. Okay. In its heyday, D&D sparked moral panic.
It did.
Critics, many of them religious fundamentalists, argued the game was corrupting America's youth by promoting devil worship, witchcraft, and violence. This is more typically known as the Satanic Panic. Yeah. And I have literally a whole section of our research document devoted to it, and it's very long. Yeah. Satanic Panic was a lot of things. So we're gonna just like
I wrote a note about it, yes, like to just kind of simplify it in my mind, which was like the note I wrote first was same shit, different font. When you think about parents who freak out over like first person shooter games, and talk about how it's encouraging violence and it's turning kids into murderers and all of that jazz. So this is like a similar energy coming out of people freaking out about something they don't understand and therefore deeming it as like evil. Right.
The controversy of the Satanic Panic kicked off with the disappearance of a 16-year-old named James Dallas Egbert III in August 1979. A student at Michigan State University with a history of depression and a penchant for role-playing games, Egbert left behind a suicide note before vanishing. The detective tasked with investigating the case theorized that Egbert had entered the school's steam tunnels as a part of a D&D game. Though Egbert disputed this explanation when he resurfaced a month later, his subsequent suicide in August 1980, as well as the detective's continued claims of a connection, cemented the link in some observers' eyes. The game was also blamed for a Virginia high school student's 1982 suicide and the 1984 murder of a Missouri teenager by two D&D playing peers.
Yeah, and these are just like a couple examples of lots and lots of instances where the game was just a part of whatever person either committing the crime or unfortunately taking their own life. They just happened to be associated with the game. Right. And like the game was not the problem, but all anyone could see was the game was the problem. Yeah. Yeah. And it made me think of, there's a true crime podcast that I listened to once that was talking about this band in I think it was the 80s, who, if anyone has like heard this story and knows what I'm talking about, please feel free to like correct me on like the specifics. But like the overarching story was this band wanted to be very popular in the 70s, 80s. They did not grow to fame, just a spoiler alert. But they started legitimately like trying to worship Satan.
Love that.
And they actually sacrificed one of their classmates.
Oh,
and like
my gosh.
Actually successfully like killed someone.
Oh my gosh.
And so like stories like that would get muddled in with like, I'm playing this D&D game that has demons in it. Right. And then it would just like exacerbate the problem.
I, in college, had a mass media course where we talked about a lot of things, TV, movies, things like that. But we had to do debates in that class. And I had the like video game violence debate.
Sure.
And the thing that I remember pulling out of that multiple times in my argument, I was for video games and my opponent was against. In all of the research that I found, correlation does not equal causation.
Correct.
So just because somebody plays video games does not equate them
to
violence.
Yeah.
And similarly for D&D. In fact, the end of this particular section for us today, at least, repeatedly debunked by researchers, the supposed link between D&D and violence earned the game a bad reputation in the eyes of some. But as Clyde Haberman noted for the New York Times in 2016, it also boosted D&D's popularity, with the number of players leaping from the thousands to the millions.
Yeah.
Because nothing sells quite like Rebellion, you know what I mean?
Quite like Rebellion, or quite like sensationalizing, this kind of stuff. Which
whenever we do get into an episode maybe solely devoted to the Satanic Panic, I mean, Gygax was very Christian.
Yeah.
And there were like some parts of D&D lore that were taken from what?
Gygax, Jehovah's Witness.
Sorry, yes, that's
right. And then Arneson, very Christian.
Yes.
So either way, both very religious.
Right. But some of the like lore of D&D was like tied into Christianity and like religious figures.
But then there was a point where Gygax like refuted having angels. He was like, clearly that's overboard.
Right.
He's like, I think everyone's smart enough to understand that angels won't be present in D&D. And it's like,
what?
Okay.
So I mean, it's just Satanic Panic is wild. And like I've said now twice already, there's a whole section that I think we want to get into, but for the sake of our time and your time, we will make that another time. So continuing on, TSR found itself in real trouble in the 1980s. Facing stagnating sales, TSR started laying off employees in waves, which is, I am just making a correlation now. I just watched somebody's Instagram reel of her finding out real time that she was getting laid off from Discord. Oh. So like Discord is doing mass layoffs, Twitch is doing mass layoffs. Wizards of the Coast just did mass layoffs. So it's just funny to see, not funny, it's interesting to see the like cyclical nature of that sort of a thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
In one round of layoffs, they started on the west side of the building and worked their way across the building, firing people. In another set of layoffs, the head of the role-playing game design department at wit's end, after huge reductions had already taken place, gathered his team together and asked someone to volunteer to be fired.
I wrote the note. I was like, literally imagine yourself like being called into a meeting and someone sits you down with all these other people. Is like, hi guys, one of us, one has to leave.
Like, it feels like one of those like trolley problem.
Yes. And so like, I'm even more fascinated to like, I want to know who left. I want to know how that decision was made. And like, I feel so bad. Like, no one should have to be in that situation. And I'd be fascinated. Of course, he has more experience like in more of the modern age of D&D, but like, I'd be interested to know like Matt Colville's like timeline being at like Wizards and like D&D and like his how that all played out.
Sure.
But yeah, it's
wild, man.
Starting on just one side of the building and just being like ding 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 ding, like friggin'. My brain also like does the Cusco thing, like nope, you probably not likely. Let me guess, you have a great personality.
Yeah. By 1983, TSR had split into 4 separate sub-companies, among them TSR Inc. and TSR Entertainment Inc. So they really kind of narrowed things down and split things apart. Financial woes led Gygax to hire the woman who would eventually push him out of his own company. Can I just say, I love that it's a woman. Okay, great. Moving on. It just like, it feels so good.
It just feels a little satisfying.
I don't know anything about this woman, but it just feels so good.
I'm sure we might come to like eat our words, or I'm not sure. Right. It's like, there's a possibility that we could come to eat our words, but right this moment in history.
That feels nice. Boy, that feels nice.
It feels good.
In 1984, Gygax hired Lorraine Williams, whose family owned the copyright to the Buck Rogers comic character, to help steer TSR Inc. back to profitability. There it is.
You got it.
The two had a falling out, but Williams liked the company and its staff, so she secretly bought out Gygax's partners.
She's like, I'm gonna.
Wild,
this is. It's kind of like Just Desserts. Honestly, it's a little karmic if you think about it. Because Gary was like, "Get out, Arneson," and then a woman pops in and she's like, "No, you get out.
I don't like you."
I'd be fascinated to know if this lady, was it Williams' last name?
Yes.
I'd be fascinated to know if Williams was like, "Why didn't you keep Arneson around? You're an idiot."
Sure.
Or if she even has a thought.
I just, like, in business school, in college, when
in the biz,
I was attending my minor classes for HR management and marketing.
Sure.
You get, this is how business works. And you get told a lot about how to be successful in business. And it's never is it secretly under the table kick someone out of their business. Always it is follow directions, be a good, like, obedient employee, like, that's very much corporate drone training kind of a thing. And, like, the more I am in business, corporate or otherwise, and reading about big business, I'm like, all you fuckers are twisty as hell.
You're all so backstabby.
And what the hell?
Yeah.
Which I guess, like, I don't know, that's not like a new concept to me.
No, it's
but,
not.
Like, it's just like, my God.
But there's so much of the build up this concept of a perfect worker, of a perfect, like, follow the rules person, then just enough people follow the rules and do what you want them to, and then you have more freedom to be twisty if you end up actually being a twisty human. That's not the case for every business, but, like, in the case of this one,
does seem to be more often than not, though. The non-twisty humans seem to be rare. And, like,
I love them. We're calling them twisty.
I don't know why that's the word I chose, but that's the word I chose. So in a dramatic board meeting on October 22nd, 1985, TSR's board voted Gygax out as president and CEO and replaced him with Williams. Can you imagine
being in that room?
You're a millionaire. You're a millionaire.
Not anymore.
And you're sitting in this boardroom with your cushy tush and a seat.
Your cush tush.
And you've probably got a snack or two. You just finished your morning coffee. And the board's like, listen, get out. And you're like, huh? Come again? I just laid off everyone else. What do you mean? Sorry, I hired the lady you're replacing me. Okay.
No, I'm not part of the Oh, I'm so sorry. You misunderstand. I'm not part of the
Oh, I am?
Oh, I'm part of the layoffs.
Oh. Huh. Williams, in turn, led TSR until 1997, when it was acquired by Wizards of the Coast, which we all know is the company behind Magic the Gathering. In efforts to profit from D&D's popularity, we spawned products like a successful series of novels. Under Williams' leadership, the company began producing novels based on the game. By the early 1990s, the fiction department at TSR was grossing about the same amount of money as the role-playing game.
Yeah, I liked, there's a spot in there, I'm not sure if it's that article or one of the other ones you found, where they were talking about how TSR, as in, like, the game side, not the book side, like, required so many more employees.
Yes.
Because, like, you've got lots of illustrators, lots of game designers, lots of, like, all of the things to make the game. When it comes to the books, you can work with, like, a writer, an illustrator, an editor.
Yeah.
And so like profit wise, that profit could boom. Yeah. And the only note that I made, but I think is absolutely true, is making books for this, so fucking smart.
Sure, yeah.
But, and like, especially for the, that's why I wrote that. I wrote for the era, like for that time period, making like books that accompanied like the D&D lore and stuff totally makes
like
sense.
Inspiration for your own game.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like I, for the longest time, had no idea that D&D had like books that came out about it. But like I think TJ had a few growing up. My stepdad like definitely read a bunch of them. Like he doesn't play a D&D system game, but like plays TTRPGs, so he has a bunch of them at home. Like that was a very smart business move.
Yes, yeah. In the early 90s, so this is a little bit before that last point, but TSR felt market pressure to innovate thanks to the rise of games like Vampire the Masquerade. They began to experiment with CD-ROMs. Remember those? Games with CDs, games with videotapes, etc. It was all very exciting, but it was also very expensive.
Yeah.
Random House was TSR's distributor. They paid them for product not when it was sold to bookstores, but when it arrived at Random House's warehouse.
Just interesting.
So therefore, if TSR shipped a lot of product, Random House would pay them for it. Yes, Random House could return product for a refund, but when sales were good, this wasn't a problem. This money could then be used to finance things like a CD-ROM of the D&D rules. This structure would lead to overprinting.
Yeah.
And TSR failing to pay their printer. Because TSR's debt to their printer eventually became quite substantial, the company signed a contract agreeing to only print books with them. The printer, having a monopoly on TSR's business, began to increase their rates. So in 1996, Random House returned millions of dollars worth of TSR product. 30 employees were let go from TSR right before Christmas. Sound familiar? In the new year, the printer announced they would not publish any more TSR products until they received payment on their debt. TSR, it seemed, was doomed. Their distributor was returning millions of dollars worth of product, and the printer whom they were required by contract to use for their printing was refusing to print anything else. It seemed likely that TSR would be dismembered, and the fate of Dungeons and Dragons and possibly even role-playing itself hung in the balance. So that was right before
Wizards.
That was right before Wizards.
Yeah, because Wizards really like kind of took a little bit of an L.
Yeah.
Like acquiring D&D.
Yes.
But yeah, geez.
So Wizards, kind of getting into that, Five Rings Publishing was a gaming company which published The Legend of the Five Rings card game. And Five Rings CEO, Bob, I'm going to mess this up, Abramowitz, heard about the problems at TSR. He flew to Lake Geneva to meet with management and left with a letter giving him an option to buy TSR. Now, neither Abramowitz nor Five Rings had enough cash to buy TSR, but Wizards of the Coast did. Peter Adkinson and future Paizo.
I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
I wrote,
Paizo CEO Lisa Stevens flew to Lake Geneva and spent the summer of 1997 managing the company's transition from TSR to Wizards. And while for them it was a moment of excitement and triumph, the staff of TSR was left feeling defeated.
Yeah.
Adkison and Stevens immediately set about doing what they could to raise morale and demonstrate, as Lisa Stevens said, "We may be executives from Wizards of the Coast, but we're gamers and we're geeks and we're a little bit goofy." Adkinson offered jobs at Wizards to the vast majority of the TSR staff. To make the transition to Seattle easier, Wizards flew TSR staff to Seattle for house hunting weekends. They paid for movers and even helped new employees that got caught paying rent on apartments in both Lake Geneva and Seattle.
Yeah, as tough as that transition was, to think about a company like footing that much money just to help transition a staff and like also keep a lot of the staff on, like that would certainly make me feel more taken care of and like feel better about the transition.
And I should say, this is also a Nerdist article. This one's called The Story of D&D Part 2, How Wizards of the Coast Saved Dungeons and Dragons. While TSR treated sales numbers like secrets, at Wizards they were announced openly. If an employee's product was doing well, they knew about it. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of discourse right now about Wizards and Hasbro and kind of just the shit that is coming from all of that. And I don't want to discount or invalidate any of that.
Yeah.
But it does seem like in 1997, when the product was bought from TSR to Wizards of the Coast, they were taking care of people, it seemed like.
Yeah. And they, you know, I think I was watching a video where Matt Colville was talking about, he was not saying like Wizards of the Coast or Hasbro. He was like, you know, this game that you play. But he was talking about how so many of the really tough decisions or really tough like moves do not come from like Wizards.
Sure.
They come from Hasbro.
Yeah.
And they come from like the bottom line from Hasbro. And so I'm sure that there are a lot of people who actually really enjoyed working for Wizards or want to be a part of that. But yeah, there's a really tough like dad.
Big brother. Yeah.
Big brother who's like calling a lot of the shots.
Yeah. Despite buying an ailing company ridden with debt, the purchase worked out well for Wizards. Adkison said, "We were able to turn D&D into a profitable line within just 3 months," which is wild.
Crazy.
That's a very short amount of time. New Dungeons & Dragons books were being put on store shelves. For the next few years, they would even continue to have the TSR logo on them, along with Wizards logo, of course. Adkison, instead of suing Gygax, he said he wrote checks to Gary Gygax, his ex-wife, Dave Arneson, in exchange for a clean bill of health on the intellectual property, i.e. Dungeons & Dragons.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Adkison recalled, "Perhaps this wasn't strictly necessary, but there were many hard feelings among old school gamers that Gary and Dave had both been cheated. The payments also made it clear that Wizards of the Coast and no one else had claimed the intellectual property of Dungeons & Dragons, which would help Wizards later in its own sale to Hasbro." But I when I read that, I was like, oh, wow, that's really nice. He didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
He absolutely did not have to do that. Gygax was no longer a part of the company.
Yep.
Neither was Arneson.
Yep.
Like, there was nothing legally holding him to doing that. But that made, especially Gygax, treat Wizards of the Coast with way more respect and like admiration, and like he became not even necessarily the face of Dungeons and Dragons, but he became like a cheerleader for it.
Yes. Yeah, and I feel like it probably, I'm putting myself like in the shoes because I can't know like what Gygax or Arneson actually like said in response or how they felt about it. But my thought is like, if somebody is, you know, I've been voted out of my company. Somebody is coming to me and they're like, "Hi, I know that you've been cheated. I work for this company now. I think you deserve like a cut of this. Here you go."
Right.
I'd be like, this sucks, but also
thank you.
Thanks for acknowledging me. Yeah, that's definitely how I would feel.
This is from the same series of articles, but this is part 3, how 3rd edition became the mother of many. At Gen Con in 1999, they announced a 3rd edition of the game. The goal of D&D 3rd edition was to create a game that still felt like D&D, but sloughed off the mishmash of rules that had accumulated on the game over the past decades. The game, when released in 2000, proved to be a great success. Fans saw that Wizards understood and loved D&D, and the game, designed by Monty Cook, Skip Williams, and Jonathan Tweet, is still played by gamers today, although the back of the book might not say 3rd edition anymore. Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition is the mother of 1,000 children that came about thanks to the Open Gaming License. We all know this.
I was like, you ever heard of that?
I'm going to call the Open Gaming License OGL from now on because that's easier to say.
100%.
The OGL was the brainchild of Ryan Dancy. In 2000, Ryan Dancy was brand manager at Wizards of the Coast. He decided that the best thing for the future of the game was to set it free The OGL would allow other publishers to create adventures, settings, and other materials using the D&D 3rd edition rules. So you've got D&D, the base of D&D, the rules, the backbone. And the OGL made it possible for you to take those rules, create adventures, create settings, even I would dare say bend the rules a little bit, create homebrewed rules, things like that.
Yeah.
Before the OGL, TSR would sue companies at the drop of the hat for copyright infringement. They had even managed to sue a number of other gaming companies into oblivion. When word of the OGL leaked out, some other publishers actually thought it was a trap of some sort and would go on to allow... I thought
that was very funny.
would go on to allow Wizards to sue other game companies.
Wait a minute. No.
I do like the Nerdist... they kind of have a metaphor here. So the OGL would be like J.K. Rowling making the Harry Potterverse public domain.
It the article goes on to talk about how Pathfinder, Starfinder, 13th Age were all developed off of the OGL and are their own things now. And so also with creating an OGL, this offered other gaming companies to profit off of D&D 3rd edition without having to pay D&D.
And so in that sense, that should be business-wise, to put your business hat on. That sounds like a mistake, right?
Hold on.
Okay.
Business hat.
Okay. So that sounds like a mistake, right? Other companies profiting. They're going to take money from us off of your thing doesn't make business sense.
That's my thing.
It sounds like this should have been a wizard. Should have been a disaster for Wizards. Should have been a wizard.
Sounds like this should have been a wizard.
That's what it says. But there is solid reasoning behind the move. So you still got that business hat. It's okay. It's okay. You don't have
business hat.
The reasoning behind the move: other publishers would make these adventures for D&D, and these publishers would become ambassadors for the game. Right. All of their publications would drive new fans to Wizards to buy the original core books of D&D. So this just it was marketing. It was free to Wizards marketing for their core stuff, right? TSR alum Jim Butler, who was working at Wizards at the time, said the OGL truly supercharged the industry, allowed gamers to scratch almost any itch they might have. Gamers could play Call of Cthulhu, science fiction, modern spy thrillers, and superheroes, all while using some variation on the D&D 3rd edition rules. If you play Pathfinder, Starfinder, or 13th Age, you are playing a flavor of 3rd edition D&D.
Hey kid, you want to play that really weird space magic school underwater?
Wow.
You can do that.
Yeah. Paizo is likely the maker of the most popular flavor of 3rd edition D&D, and their most popular product is Pathfinder, an evolution of the 3.5 rule set. To those who see the OGL as a bad move for Wizards, the very existence of Paizo is their major piece of evidence. Pathfinder's popular. I mean, as far as if you play a TTRPG, generally, this is less true now, but I think even just a few years ago, you were either playing D&D or Pathfinder. You know what I mean? 8 years after the release of 3rd edition, Wizards of the Coast released the 4th edition of Dungeons & Dragons. Nobody liked it.
It didn't go so well.
Womp womp. Wizards of the Coast. Meanwhile, Paizo, the previous publisher of D&D magazines, such as Dragon, decided to continue publishing adventures for 3rd edition. They were successful so much so that they decided to publish their own iteration of the rules called Pathfinder. This game was a smashing success, even outselling 4th edition at certain points in the sales cycle. So Wizards said, we're gonna keep adjusting D&D. They made the 3rd edition. Everyone was like, yes,
this is so good.
You did it. Big party. 2 thumbs way up. And then they said, well, what about this one? And it's 4th edition. And everyone said, no, that was bad. And Paizo said, Pathfinder? And people said, okay. We're now in a new age of D&D, right? And that one is the one where 5th edition lives.
That one is the one where 5th.
5th edition was published in 2014. And a new edition is on its way as 1 D&D. For almost a decade, players have used 5th edition of D&D, which is designed to simplify and streamline gameplay, making the experience more creative, less bogged down by charts and details. In 5th edition, geez.
At the bar.
Players can choose characters from 9 species, such as Dragonborn, Half-Orc, and a dozen character classes from Bard to Warlock. I'm just going to make sure we didn't say anything different. Okay. 3rd edition of D&D has been prevalent, at times dominant, and successful in the industry for the past 17 years. It may be the most successful rule set for any RPG ever published.
D&D and I had a question for you when I was reading over this.
Please.
Have you or has Sam ever talked about 3rd edition? Have you looked over 3rd edition at all? Because I am not even familiar with 3rd edition.
I have not. I feel like Sam probably has, just given his nature. I believe 3rd edition is the edition Dad played.
Okay.
Dad.
Michael, please confirm.
I think that's just like the most popular edition, period. Mm-hmm. So I think more often than not, unless you came into D&D in the last couple of years, chances are you played
not
3rd
couple,
edition.
But like in the last few years.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah, because I started on 5th.
Right.
Yeah.
Same. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we will talk about this some other time. But there were mechanical changes, obviously, to that stuff. And the thing that I want to just pull out of this maybe larger conversation was with the release of the 3rd edition is when you saw the D20 system introduced. Right. So before that, it was tables. It was math on math on math on math.
On math on math.
Right. So the 3rd edition really simplified and revolutionized the accessibility of D&D for people. And I, again, have not compared 3rd edition to 5th edition, but I think 5th edition is just more true of that. So it was,
I think it's even further resynthesizing.
Yeah. Just reducing the amount of, if you have then this, less if then statements, more roll a die and see what happens.
Yeah. And a lot more like roll a die, add a number.
Yeah.
If you can.
Yeah. Roll a d20, add any relevant modifiers, compare the result to a target number. Period.
As opposed to like, if I can hit this hard and that person can hit not so hard, what number do I subtract and add by to multiply to find out how hard I hit hard?
Yeah. There are some people, and I have, again, a mechanical changes like area of our research that we won't get in today because we're over an hour at this point. But there are some people who I think feel like that flavor of D&D, the flavor of comparing and contrasting and adding and multiplying and all of these things, that feels like D&D to them because that's what it was.
Yeah, and I totally understand how that can scratch an itch for people who are very strategically minded and who love to get into those like finer details of combat. And I think that's awesome. I'm a little theater kid and I just want to be a really cool fairy and like hit things and not have to like work on mental math too hard.
It strikes me. Nobody be mad at me, okay?
Don't.
It strikes me as the same kind of argument as people who don't feel like they're driving unless they're driving stick shift. You know what I mean?
Oh, it could. I feel like another version of that thought is like purist. Like,
yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Like, Dad does not drive a stick shift anymore, but he did for a very long time. When I was in high school, Dad, do you remember when I was in high school and you were trying to teach me, well, Mom had already taught me how to drive an automatic. That was easy.
So he was trying
easy.
He's trying to go back.
And he was like, okay, but if you really want to drive, like if you want to drive the real way,
that's not a thing.
you learn how to drive a stick. And I was like, okay, this seems complicated though, but okay. and we were in the North Star High School parking lot. And I was trying to learn how to drive stick on his Mazda, and I could not figure out the clutch and like shifting rhythm. I was so frustrated, I started crying.
So you're comparing stick shift to 3rd edition.
Yeah. Well, stick shift to 2nd edition.
Okay.
Yeah. And I started crying, and then he offered to give me Culvers to make me stop crying. Because I was overwhelmed. And then we never tried again.
That is Wizards offering 3rd edition.
Yeah, please.
Culvers? Come on. It's all right.
Yeah, exactly.
Because then you were happy.
Right. It was fine. So this has been your starter pack on the history of D&D.
Yeah.
We want to do more because we want to dive in more to Satanic Panic and the mechanical changes from edition to edition. But this was your first little glimpsey glamps.
And a little bit for us too, because as much as we play this game, like, I have not hit, I'm always interested to see when an interest I have, like when a certain hyperfixation like era is going to happen for me. And as far as like the history of D&D, I have not been like interested to hyperfixate on that yet.
Sure.
So this has been very like interesting
and I
to look into.
Like I knew of the history. Like I knew it existed. I knew the name Gary Gygax. I knew Wizards of the Coast, you know, like that sort of thing. But not to this extent. So, and I've also, obviously, I think we've both heard of Satanic Panic more than once. But just like getting into the whys and the hows is
well, and I feel like
wild.
There are so many parts, and we can talk about this in that episode if we get there. There are so many parts of Satanic Panic that have nothing to do with D&D.
Sure, right.
And like there's that whole idea of like it just got associated, and so then it all got lumped in. Yeah. So like there's just so much about it that we still have to learn, which is so cool.
Have to learn.
Anywho, that's it for us this week. So thank you so much for spending some time with us today. And thanks to Noah for the use of our theme song. His Instagram and all of his information is going to be in the episode below. So please be sure to give him a follow. Check out his band Pearl Parade. They just dropped an album. Pearly Whites is what it's called. And be sure to stay up to date on everything that his band is doing and their music.
Yeah. If you are enjoying the show, we want you to do some things. Now it's your turn to work. We've worked. Now it's your turn.
Listen.
Okay. First, you should leave us a review. Okay. On please all of your podcatchers, put your little reviews in there. Rate it 5 stars because I love you. Say it back. And that just helps other people find us. Second, you should follow us wherever you get your podcast so that you can find these episodes faster. Okay. And then third, last thing, I want you to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. I'm not even going to say Twitter anymore because we don't post it there. Okay. And then also, if you're on YouTube, and if you're not, go onto YouTube, hit subscribe, and hit the little bell notification thing.
Ding, 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 ding,
okay?
ding, ding, ding.
You got those 3 things. Leave a review, follow us where you get your podcasts, subscribe to us on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. I'll give you a second. Go ahead and do that.
So, with all of that being said, there is one more little tiny thing. We want to hear from you guys. So please, yes, go follow us on all of those things, but we want to hear from you as well. So please comment below. We'll try to hop in the comments and talk with you all. But yeah, we love talking with you all. So if there's something in the episode that came up today that made you think, or if you have a topic you'd like us to expand on or talk a little bit more about, comment on all of those platforms, but also feel free to send us an email at chromaroses@gmail.com. That's CHROMAROSES@gmail.com. Hey. And that's all lowercase. Someday we'll have a theme song for that. But that's all lowercase. I know, so many times. And we can't wait to hear from you guys. Please, please, please come say hi.
This has been another episode in the garden for Chromatic Roses. I'm Caitie.
And I'm Soren. Fight evil, love others.